Welcome to the Credit Concept Podcast. I am your host, credit coach Nicole Scott, and in today's episode, we are going to be talking about secured credit cards. So if you are in the process of building credit and establishing credit so you can get into the 700 Club, make sure to listen to this entire podcast. Let's go. All right, thank you so much for joining in today, guys. We are going to be talking about secured credit cards. Secured credit cards are going to be a very important part of rebuilding your credit or even establishing new credit for those of you that have a hard time getting approved for credit cards. Oftentimes, we have to start off on some of these lower level credit cards in order to get to the next level. Don't take it personal, but sometimes banks aren't just going to flat out trust you, okay? And it's not because of anything to do with nationality, gender, or any of those things. It's solely based on the data that is on your credit report. They could care less about anything else other than the data that's on your credit report. So that's why it's extremely important for you to get a copy of your credit report. And there is a link below in the description where you can get a 3-bureau credit report by Smart Credit. And that is also going to help support our channel. That way you can track your credit and keep up with what's going on your credit report. Now, back to the main topic here, secured credit cards. Secured credit cards are a great way for you to establish credit. And there's two different types of secured credit cards. The first type of secured credit cards are going to be more or less your subprime credit cards. And what I mean by subprime secured credit cards are these banks, we are just going to use them for what we need and understand that there is no long-term relationship that's ever really going to be established by us having a relationship with them. And when I say relationship, I mean any sort of bank relationship. In this case, you're getting a secured credit card from them, so you'd have a relationship. Now, these relationships will never graduate. They are just going to be a secured card. And please, we will get to this later, but do not use the secured cards once you get them. Understand the strategy behind it. Again, this podcast talks about the concept of credit. So you have to understand the concept before you can play the game, because credit is just a game. So some of the most popular subprime credit cards are going to be 𝗖𝗶𝗏𝗁. There's Premier. There's also the 𝓕𝓐𝓏 card. First Progress. That's another very popular one. And a lot of those, more or less subprime credit cards, they don't graduate to unsecured credit cards. They're always going to be a secured credit card. So once you open them, you have to keep them open. You need to keep them open for at least 2 years, okay? Don't open a secured credit card and then close it 3 months later because you put too much money on them, okay? These subprime credit cards with places like mentioned 𝗖𝗶𝗏𝗁, First Progress, 𝓕𝓐𝓏, Premier, those are more or less the subprime categories. Even some of the secured credit cards that I have in my credit building guide. So if you need the full guide on how to build credit, there is a link below where you can acquire that credit building guide. And a lot of these cards mentioned are in there. And, you just have to understand when you are opening up accounts with these types of places, do not use the secured credit card. Do not use it. Put it in a drawer and just let it sit. Understand the concept of why you're getting it. The reason why we are getting these subprime credit cards is just to establish payment history, right? And you need to be careful because some of these cards have a monthly fee. Some of them have an annual fee. So if you have a balance due, you need to pay it off immediately and just keep these cards really at a zero balance, because oftentimes when we do secured credit cards with these subprime places, they're not going to graduate. They're always going to be secured. And generally they are for very low limits, maybe $200, right? And we all know we want to keep our credit utilization below 10%, preferably between 2 and 6%. I talk about this all the time. And if you haven't heard my previous podcast, visit the link below where you can watch all of the Credit Concept podcasts so you can understand the concept behind credit. And we're going to start getting into business credit and other topics. I have a lot of people reaching out. So if you have a topic that you want to cover that you think would be helpful to your, credit education, feel free to send us a DM. You can follow us on Instagram at Credit Coach Nicole Scott. Send me a DM and let me know what you would find helpful. But back to the subject at hand, these secured credit cards, they're generally for a very low limit, like $200. So, even if you go to a fast food place nowadays, it's $20, you're already at 10% right there. So you want to make sure that you're not using these cards. You have the money that is going to be basically like a savings account for you, right? You're just going to put this as a deposit. When you close these accounts, and again, we want to keep these subprime secured credit cards open for 2 years because we want to establish payment history. Even though you are not going to carry a balance, you're not going to use this card, it's still going to report an on-time payment with the credit bureaus. Now, most of these secured credit cards are going to report to all 3 credit bureaus, and it's going to say that, it's a credit card company. And, sometimes we have to start with a few different secured credit cards. But if you can get some of the top tier secured credit cards that we're going to go over, I would recommend getting those. But sometimes our credit is just not that great when we're first starting to rebuild credit. So sometimes we have to establish some subprime secured credit cards because other banks won't necessarily approve us. And of course, we need more than one credit card. We want to, sometimes we're going to have to start off with 3 to 5 secured credit cards. And the goal is to have our secured cards graduate. So the other group of secured credit cards is what I consider secured credit cards that graduate, right? Secured credit cards that are going to eventually graduate to an unsecured credit card, and you will get a check back in the mail for your deposit. And then generally that bank, whoever you have your secured credit card with, will extend your credit limit, possibly, give you more credit products in the future because now you have an established relationship. And these type of secured credit cards are generally with major banks. Capital One is a good one to start with. They're not going to give high limits in the future, but they're a good starter card. We also have banks like Navy Federal. I highly recommend that you guys try to get secured credit cards directly with credit unions like Navy Federal. And there's other, secure credit cards that you can get with major banks. I know US Bank has a secured credit card that will graduate. Discover has a secured card that will graduate. So the Discover It card is a great way to start off, and you can put a little bit of a higher balance on the secured card if you have it, because say for example, you have like $500 and you're like, look, I'm just going to put this in my savings account. Put it on a secured credit card. And because what you want to do is put that money and make it work for you. You want to put your cash on your credit report and allow your cash to help build credit. You're not using it. It's still being saved. It's right there. It's just tied up right now. But the good thing about Discover is they will graduate your secured credit card as soon as 7 months. It could take longer, but I've had several clients that have got secured credit cards with Discover and they graduated in 7 months. They got their deposit back in the form of a check in the mail, and then Discover actually extended their credit limit. So now they have real unsecured credit cards, and I have clients did the same thing with Navy Federal. They started off with, $500 secured credit card from Navy Federal, and now they have $10,000 credit cards. So you want to build the secured credit cards with banks that are going to offer long-term, meaningful relationships. And when I say meaningful, it's like, well, what more can you possibly provide to me? Because I'm just getting started on this party, right? Eventually, I will have good credit to where you're going to want to provide me with a quote, and I'm not going to need to be begging for credit. I'm going to be the one in charge because I can go to multiple banks and I can, basically see what the approvals are looking like as far as the interest rate, if you can get 0% interest for a certain period of time, and you can shop around because at this point you're a consumer that has over a 700 credit score. So that's going to give you a lot more buying power, and you can get better terms, better interest rates, 0% interest credit cards. So you have a lot more benefits by having a good personal credit score. Not to mention, a lot of your business credit is going to be dependent upon your personal credit, but that's a whole nother topic for another day. But back to the subject at hand. Sometimes I get derailed, so I just try to give as much value as possible. And I know sometimes it's like system overload, but that's why I offer coaching. So if you are interested in getting credit coaching, or if you're interested in having us help you with your credit, feel free to book a call with me. We do provide one free 15-minute consultation to see if we would be a good fit to work together, and I can provide help to you in the areas that you need help with regard to your personal or business credit. So some of the banks that I would highly recommend for some of the better secured cards that actually graduate are Navy Federal, Bank of America, Capital One, Chase, Wells Fargo, US Bank, Citibank, and the list goes on and on. There's a number of credit unions out there that also offer secured credit cards. All that you would need to do is just open up a checking and savings account with them so you can start building a relationship, and then you can apply for their secured credit card. Now keep in mind, you can apply for their other credit cards to see if you would be approved. Worst case scenario, they will tell you, hey, you're not approved for that card. However, we can offer you our secured credit card as an alternative. And if that's the case, I would go ahead and take that offer, because that way you can get your foot in the door, start building a relationship, and then eventually graduate to unsecured and get more credit cards and more credit products with that bank. So there's also US Alliance. There's a ton of different credit unions out there. You can even do Truist Bank. You can do TD Bank. You can do Fifth Third Bank. You can do PNC. There's a ton of great banks out there, and some banks might not be in your area. So I would go to the bank branch locator. You can also use iBankNet and look up some of the banks and the top credit unions in your particular area, because guess what? The best banks are like those hidden little gemstones in your area that are local, that want to help their community, and you can get in on the personal side and then, build that relationship on the business side as well. So, just to give you an idea of why these websites are so powerful is you can look up the credit unions that tend to give the highest limits. So that way you can start building a relationship with them, even with a secured card, just to get the party started, okay? And if you have issues opening up bank accounts, then, we have a problem, because we need to fix your check systems report. We also need to take a look at your early warning to make sure that it's not going to prevent you from opening up bank accounts, because that's the best way that we can start building secured credit cards is with banks. But unfortunately, we can't just go and say, hey, most of them at least, we can't go and say, hey, I just want your secured credit card. Capital One you can do that with, but they have an annual fee. A lot of these secure credit cards with credit unions, there is no annual fee. So it's a great way to just get your foot in the door, start building with them. You can use those credit cards for your daily expenses. You just want to make sure that you are spending the cash that you have. You are not spending what you cannot pay back in cash. And I highly recommend, spending and paying on credit cards like Discover, Navy Federal, some of these credit union secured credit cards that you can say, hey, I'm building a relationship. They can see that I spend money, and they can see that I pay my bills on time as well. So you just want to make sure that you do not let a high credit card utilization report to the credit bureau. So you need to know when your billing statement date is. I have left a link below for our credit card tracking log, where you can list all of your credit cards, the billing statement date, the due date, and the date that they report to the credit bureaus. So that way you can stay organized. You always want to make sure you know these dates. If you're going to strategically build your credit, you need to make sure that basically you have zero debt reporting to the credit bureaus. A lot of people say, oh, we'll leave a 2% or 6% balance. No, just pay that thing off in zero, okay, for the time being, because these credit cards are too low of a limit to be played with right now. When you have a $10,000 credit card, then you can put some money on it and not necessarily worry about, a little bit of money being reported to the credit bureaus, a couple $100. But on a secure card, a couple $100 is literally going to tank your credit card, because generally they're very low limits. So that's why I tell people, don't use the subprime secure credit credit cards. Just put them away and let them work for you. Let your money work for you. But with the, better bank secured credit cards, you want to, spend, pay, but do not spend what you cannot pay in cash, okay? Because that is where you get yourself in trouble, and we don't want to do that, okay? You can also build with a ton of other places that I have in my credit building guide. So get a copy of my credit building guide below, and that's going to really go over all of these different options that we went over today. So again, guys, if you have found value in my podcast, please leave me a comment below. Follow me on Instagram at Credit Coach Nicole Scott. Make sure that you have subscribed to my YouTube channel at Credit Coach Nicole Scott. And until next time, guys, keep building.